Hello, LinkedIn friends, and welcome to a new episode of, a podcast episode and a LinkedIn Live episode. Today, we're having with us Bonnie Fetch, who is joining us from Florida in a very sunny morning in Florida. Bonnie is the Vice President, Cummins Distribution Business Supply Chain Services. She's also obviously a very accomplished executive, a wife, a mother, a grandmother, as well as a published author. A couple of words just for you, for all of you about Cummins. Obviously, it's one of the largest global corporations that designs, engineers, manufactures engines and related technologies, including fuel systems, controls, air handling, filtration, as well as electrical power generation systems, with a revenue of close to 24 billion last year. Bonnie has been in the business for many years. She's had a career of nearly 30 years. She actually started in the service industry, running restaurants, and then owning a small family business. Then she joined a Fortune 50 industrial company where she held a range of positions, including HR, and then with responsibilities along logistics, manufacturing, supply chain. And she recently joined Cummins, where she leads the global supply chain functions for Cummins distribution business. So I'd love to welcome you, Bonnie. Thanks a lot for making the time to join us today, and it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here.
And I wanted to ask you first and foremost to tell us a little bit about your career, because it's quite, let's say, it's quite unusual. So you unusual and different. So maybe walk us through a little bit what led you to where you are today in supply chain.
Yeah, happy to. It's certainly non-traditional, not a career path that I could have mapped out 30 years ago. As you mentioned, I started my career in hospitality, and mostly that was because my father and grandfather were both in the industrial side of the world. In fact, they worked for Caterpillar. And when I was a young girl, there were many times when the business cycles were so severe that my father and grandfather had to find second jobs to make ends meet. And so manufacturing wasn't really something that I was interested in. So I went in a completely different direction. Ran restaurants for a number of years, which is a wonderful place to get customer experience, a terrible place to balance work and family life. But I did that for a number of years, and then I owned a small travel agency, which was my first lesson in disruption as a business. So it was a small family-owned business. I'm dating myself now, but it was prior to the World Wide Web becoming a real disruptor. And so we ended up closing that business when you could start booking your travel online. And so it was a great lesson that stuck with me about business disruption. So I then started my industrial career nearly 27 years ago, which, is amazing to me that it's been that long, in supply chain. Although at the time, supply chain as a function wasn't really something I was familiar with. I started in logistics as an inventory control analyst in planning, and then I went into warehouse management. Then I was asked to move into HR and spent a third of my career in different HR roles as an HR partner, as a learning and development professional, strategic HR, and leadership development over the course of many years. I then had the opportunity to lead a couple of end-to-end businesses, a transmission business located in Europe, and then a component business, which was a global business, again, with end-to-end responsibilities. And then came full circle back to planning, logistics, and order management for Caterpillar's aftermarket business. And then 2.5 years ago, I made the change to join Cummins as the global supply chain leader for the distribution business. I now have a couple of corporate groups that report to me as well. And I have strategic leadership responsibility for 4 growth markets in the sales and service side of the business, which is really a unique opportunity for me to not only have supply chain responsibility, but to also have responsibility for how we sell and service our customers in the aftermarket in Africa, India, China, and Latin America.
That's quite a scope. And I guess this year has kind of flipped things upside down. So maybe I'll start also by asking you how has COVID-19 and all the disruption that has taken place and is still taking place this year affected you, and if there was some case studies and changes that you've made in your supply chain to better adapt.
Yeah, it's really it's an interesting question. So 2020 has certainly been a year that none of us were prepared for. It actually reminds me of my early days in logistics when I used to say, 1 year of experience in the logistics business gives you 10 years of experience, because there was always something happening and lots of chaos in the logistics world back then. And I feel like 2020 is the same. We're getting, a decade of learning in 1 year. What we are recognizing is we're going through a supply chain transformation. So we recognize the opportunity to improve the way we serve customers, to improve our inventory performance, and to improve our processes and improve our technology. And 2020 has just really polarized the need, right? It's really put the spotlight on, as a global company, we have to be connected. We have to have the ability to work remote. Even in our distribution business, which, those are boots on the ground in 190 countries around the world, we had to figure out in a shutdown situation how to get technicians to our customer sites. And in some cases, the use of technology, AR technology and remote diagnostics and, kind of remote consultation was the way that we have served our customers. And so I don't know that we've learned a ton. I think we've reinforced the need to go faster on digitizing, on connecting, on leveraging technologies that, in the pre-COVID world, we thought were interesting, but often struggled to figure out how to go faster and how to make the business case to do so.
No, absolutely. And well, I guess we still have a little bit of to go. It's I guess there's some light at the end of the tunnel, because the vaccines are starting to roll out, but that being said, it's probably going to take a good 6 to 12 months before most of the Western world, not to talk about emerging markets, get vaccinated. So we still have a bit of disruption to handle.
Yeah, the challenge is real. I mean, it's in supply chain, we tend to lead and lag in terms of impact to the business overall. And we do believe that our challenges will remain for the next number of months, not only from the concerning COVID spread that we're seeing and some period of time before the vaccine actually makes an impact, but also seeing the fairly significant bounce in business. So a really significant drop in volume from Q1 to Q2, and then a very significant increase in volume from Q2 to Q3, and our supply base really taking some time to recover. We see the next 3 to 6 months as pretty critical to get back on track, and lots of challenges to do that.
And I wanted to ask you a little bit about all the decoupling discussions, the tariffs, the trade wars, the shifting of manufacturing, maybe without going too much into obviously details, but how has that affected your footprint? Have you moved some production around? Have you brought it closer to the market? How's that situation played out for Cummins in general, and how do you see it playing out in the longer term?
Yeah, I think Cummins has a very global manufacturing network, and so thankfully with some redundant capabilities, so that's been good. Where we see single source products, particularly in places where the COVID restrictions, the lockdowns, the port closures have created some challenges. India and Mexico, to name a couple. But I think that what the COVID pandemic has reinforced is the shift from 10 years ago. It was all about a global network, sourcing products from the lowest cost countries, to really, I think the next decade is going to be, how do you regionalize your supply chain? And Cummins has a regional supply chain, some global interconnectivity, obviously, but as a supply chain organization, we've been moving to a regional structure. And where we've done that already, we've actually seen the ability to address the COVID crisis in a much more efficient manner by having a team working across the company in a particular region. I think the implications for manufacturing are going to be, looking at the balance of total cost of ownership and where we might procure low cost country or lowest cost provider parts, and balance that with risk, which sometimes is difficult to put a financial measure on the risk, right? But we might be able to buy the piece part cheaper in some other part of the world and transport it and even afford to carry the inventory. But when there's a supply chain disruption, such as the disruptions we've been seeing this year, the cost of figuring out how to find an alternative source or the delay in being able to manufacture is quite a significant cost as well. And so I do think, we'll continue to evaluate the footprint and our agility to be able to respond to these kinds of supply chain disruptions moving forward.
And I guess this kind of comes into my mind because I was talking to a couple of 3PL clients that we have actually today, and they were saying that it's just a madness what's happening right now on the equipment side. There's more containers for certain trades, especially Asia, US, Asia, Europe, China specifically. I wanted to ask, is that particularly also impacting you at the moment, and how do you see this? Because it seems to be like a major problem to everyone at the current state of time.
Yeah, for sure. We're seeing extended logistics times, right? So we're having to adjust for, week to often weeks of extended logistics times. I just had a situation yesterday where I was asked for some help with a booking to get product out of China. Right. And many of the companies are not even taking bookings right now because they're so busy. So it is a real challenge, I think, for everyone. And the question is, how much of this is the significant bounce from Q to Q3 and it's going to settle down, and how much of this is here, to stay for some period of time. I don't think we fully know that yet, but definitely the logistics side of the business is a real challenge for us right now.
Yeah, I mean it's significant, and obviously there's other trades that are underutilized, and so it's a complete discrepancy that seems, at least in the way it works at the moment.
Yes.
I also wanted to ask you, Moni, specifically for Industry 4.0. There's a lot of discussions in terms of the, and I was part of I think the World Economic Forum has a report where they look at the major factories of the world, and they talk a lot about IoT and machine learning and automation, robotics, and so on. I wanted to ask you specifically for Cummins, what are some of the more or case studies that you've tried to implement with good results, and maybe you can give some examples.
Yeah, of course. So first of all, I'm a little bit of a geek in this new technology innovation space, and have been for a number of years. In my previous roles, we were not necessarily talking about Industry 4.0, but we were certainly talking about and implementing, collaborative robots, 3D printing, not only for prototyping, but also for low volume legacy parts in the aftermarket, even drone technology, right? Big data and analytics and predictive logistics, which all were quite exciting and continue to evolve. At Cummins, we're doing many of the same things, right? We've had some great success with 3D printing. And our ability to serve customers in critical situations, our ability now that the cost of materials and the cost of printing continues to come down, the ability to design, engineer, and then subsequently manufacture using additive manufacturing technologies, which is exciting. It's going to give us flexibility for sure to not have to rely on inventory as heavily as we have historically had to do. Collaborative robots have been, a great efficiency and quality improvement. I think years ago when you talk about automation and robotics, people would get a little scared that this was somehow going to replace jobs and take people out of the business. And while, there certainly are roles that have been modified or eliminated as a result of robotics, it hasn't actually translated into loss of jobs. It's just changed the type of people that we need, right? We need more, programmers, and we need more data analysts and other types of roles. It's not that we don't need people, but the collaborative robots has helped us to gain efficiency because robots don't take breaks, and they're they can work 12 hours a day or 24 hours a day if we choose to work them. Also, you get quality improvement, right? And you also get safety improvement, particularly where we have, loading and unloading operations and ergonomic issues. Robots are certainly helping with that. Auto-guided vehicles, in logistics space. I've done this in my past roles. Certainly it's on the roadmap for my current company as well. But auto-guided vehicles, same. You get efficiency gains, you get safety improvements. You also get data, right? Which I think all of the automation also allows us to capture data, which is so very important to be able to do advanced analytics and gain insights that just are simply not as easy to gain when we're doing things in a more manual fashion. The thing of course I'm most excited about given my supply chain role is the big data and advanced analytics capability, using our factory data, leveraging sensor technology, leveraging telematics on our engines and OEMs vehicles to allow us to ultimately create a predictive logistics capability, right? Which, in my past, I had worked on the ability to predict when we might need a replacement part in the furthest supply chain away from the US with enough time to be able to move the product sort of just in time. And so that's a game changer when we think about, serving customers and doing it in a way that we don't have to tie up a lot of capital in having, mounds of inventory or expediting freight in order to serve customers. So there's just, there's so many opportunities in this Industry 4.0, all of which we're pursuing at different levels of velocity within Cummins, all with the mindset of taking manufacturing to the next level and allowing us to be digitized in a way that we can utilize that data for insights, not only insights in terms of efficiency and quality in the plants, but also insights for our design engineers, insights for our logistics arm of the business in terms of getting smarter about serving our customer needs. I just anecdotally over the holidays for Thanksgiving here in the US, you might have heard that there was a lot of talk about a supply chain challenge with small turkeys. So we typically have a turkey dinner on Thanksgiving, but it's normally a large gathering. And so you have 20-pound turkeys and above. Well, this year, as a result of COVID, it turns out there weren't a lot of large family gatherings. And so there was a shortage of small turkeys. Now, imagine if the industry, had enough data, had enough insight that they could have actually predicted in a pandemic year, you're probably going to need some small turkeys. They might have been more equipped to do so. And so, I just think about our ability in this industry, in the industrial side of the business, to, keep mining machines running 100% of the time, keep on-highway, trucks running 100% of the time. And the only way that we can do that is to get more predictive. Today we serve our customers, but we often do so with a pretty heavy cost of carrying inventory. We also do so with a pretty heavy cost of expediting when we have an urgent situation that we didn't necessarily plan for. This connectedness, this Industry 4.0 technology capability is going to allow us to be a lot smarter. And I think COVID has just reinforced that, in virtually every business. It's certainly important in the industrial business, but look at restaurants, grocery stores, like everybody has had to figure out how to go digital if they were going to stay in business this year. Right. So I think it just reinforces that we need to probably move faster. And it's not without challenges, right? The challenges are, the complexity, particularly for older industrial companies like ours, where we have old systems, we have, old machines. We certainly have new ones as well, but how do you integrate the two and truly create a connected ecosystem? Scalability, like how do you scale it up when you've got 600 plus locations around the world, and then how do you do it in a way that with wireless and connected technology that you secure the network, which cyber security is a real concern, particularly given it's not all new equipment and all new technology. You're integrating, kind of a hybrid of different machines. And so how do you do that and not miss a hole in your secure network?
No, I mean, absolutely. I don't think anybody has cracked the code. In some ways, I guess the younger companies or let's say the younger will have some level of advantage because they don't come with the legacy, but at the same time I haven't quite seen anybody that has figured it all out. That being said, we actually had Francisco Betti, who put together, and he's the head of advanced manufacturing for the World Economic Forum, and he shared the case study of a factory somewhere in I don't remember if it was Italy or Turkey, but they integrated fairly similar. They just bought handsets, Samsung I think it was, and then they installed some applications on it, and it was all of a sudden a $70 IoT device or $100 IoT device that they were using. So his point was that a lot can be done through creativity, but then when you talk about scaling that at 600 location basis, then it becomes a hell of a lot trickier.
Exactly. Yeah.
To your point, and we're getting a lot of questions, and I want to also ask Daniel is here with us. Daniel Stanton. Hi, Daniel, and thanks for making the connection offline. I just also want to ask you on the point of skills, Bonnie, and coming back to your background, which is fascinating, right? Service industry, running your own companies, restaurants, then you did HR, and now you did supply chain logistics at a global level. What's the skills? What allowed you, right, looking back, like Steve Jobs said, connecting the dots backwards? What allowed you to make these switches, and what are some of these skills that I also feel that today we need this flexibility, adaptability, right? Tell us a little bit about what enabled you to make these transitions in your career.
Yeah, it's a great question. I've been asked it a lot, and I don't know that I have a great answer other than I am by nature curious. I'm a continual learner. One of my top 5 strengths from Strength Finder is learner. And so I'm always curious, and I'm willing to take risks. And that probably is the key reason why I've been able to, maneuver this very strange career path, is my willingness to take risks, and my curiosity. So, when I think about, some of my moves within the industrial world, leaders have said to me, you ask great questions. And so, whenever I'm in a role in HR, as an example, I always wanted to learn the business that I was supporting. I was out on the factory floor. I was talking to employees on the factory floor. I was talking to leaders about, what's working, what's not working. It was partly my own curiosity and partly, as a support function, wanting to understand how to better serve the business. But then that signals to people, oh, she's interested in this side of the business. And then it led to conversations about, what would you like to do in your career? And I've had a couple of terrific bosses that were really focused on diversity and inclusion without even realizing that they were focused on it, right? So one of the best bosses I ever worked for asked me, what I wanted to do in my career, and I was his strategic HR partner. And I said, I'd really like to run a business. I ran businesses before I joined the company, and I'd really like to run a business. And, he had me go talk to some of his peers, all of whom said, you have a really interesting background, but we probably wouldn't put you in a product leader role because you're not an engineer, you don't have that kind of background. Well, he put me in a role running a $400 million business in Europe. I knew nothing about transmissions when I went to run that business. And in fact, I told him, I don't think I'm the best qualified person for this job. And he said, if I didn't think you were capable, I wouldn't ask you to do it. And so what I think helped me to be successful in that role is my willingness to learn and ask the people that are doing the work, how they assemble a transmission, how they design a gear, how they design a shaft, how it all works, and talking to customers. And, the more you do that, and if you're adaptable, leadership and going into different functions and different roles is really about learning and then applying, cross-functional or transferable skills. We like to call them soft skills. I like to call them harder skills because they're in many ways harder to find than hard skills. But so I think that's what's helped me. I've worked hard and I've been curious and I've taken risks, and I've also had, a couple of really terrific bosses that believed in me and, kind of threw me in the deep end, and I had to figure out how to swim.
That's always a good that's always the fastest sometimes. I mean, if you don't drown, it's the fastest.
Yeah, exactly.
So I just pulled this one because you might like seeing the testimonial that Daniel is saying about you. So I think you definitely have well, at least one big fan. I think you have a lot more, but here's one big fan.
It really is about people. I mean, to Daniel's comment, I've often answered that question, like, how did you go from working in restaurants, running restaurants, to a travel agency, to now you're working in an industrial world? And, the bottom line is we're all as leaders, we're all in the people business. And it turns out the issues are really similar, whether you're running a restaurant, a travel agency, or an industrial business. It's people that you have to attract the right people, develop the people, retain people by engaging them. And then, if you've got a clear vision and people are developed to be able to do their job, then you got to get out of the way and let them do it. And so, that I think is another reason why I've been able to navigate different parts of the business, because I really don't view myself as a supply chain leader or a HR leader or a business leader. I view myself as a people leader. And if you can figure out the people leadership piece, you can learn the rest.
Well said. And on the diversity aspect, and I know that you also wrote a book, right? I'll bring that up now. Unskirting the Issues: A Guide for the Well-Intentioned Man in Today's Workplace. Big topic, like you said, when maybe 15 years ago, when you were given the chance to have some amazing bosses, it wasn't even that much discussed. Today, as you know, it's a lot more discussed. There's been some progress, still a long way to go. Maybe tell us about your thoughts around, diversity in the workplace. Also, there's not so many women in supply chain. There's not so many women in manufacturing, still in leadership positions. Maybe let's open that topic as well.
Yeah, great. I did write a book, and I didn't grow up wanting to be an author. So people often ask me, like, did you always want to be an author? I had no idea about writing a book. And probably if I knew before writing the book how much time and effort it would take, I don't know if I would have started, to be honest. But the way it came about, I have had a successful career. And I never wanted to associate myself with the term feminism, like a lot of women don't, right? I would never have introduced myself as a feminist, because in my mind, growing up in the 70s, feminism was associated with some, not so nice connotations, right? It was about male bashing and bra burning. And that to me wasn't what I was about. In fact, I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about being a woman in a very male dominated world, and certainly a male dominated industry. And so I was part of the problem. Like, I figured out how to fit in. I figured out how to be tough. I figured out how to hang with the guys and not let their comments, take me off track. And consequently, I got ahead. Now, I got ahead and got to a certain level in my career where the feedback was, she's too aggressive, she's not likable, therefore she can't get to the next level. And I had around the same time started getting requests for interviews. This was around 2013, 2014, for books and articles that were being written on this topic of gender inclusion. And the questions were typically always the same. Like, tell us about your career. You're pretty senior in a very large company. How did you navigate? What do you attribute your success to? But the follow-up question stumped me in every single interview. And it was, I would say, like, I worked hard. I surrounded myself with great people. I was a little bit lucky to be in the right place at the right time. Why are there not more women in the pipeline? And in those two interviews, it did kind of hit me by surprise. I had never really thought about the pipeline. I had never looked behind me to see that I was often the only woman in the room. Despite the fact that my husband had asked on a number of occasions, why are you always the only woman in the picture? I would travel around the world to all these exotic places, and I would visit suppliers, visit customers, visit channel partners. I'm the only woman. And even on my boss's teams, traditionally, I was the only woman. And sometimes on my own teams, when I took over a team, I was the only woman. But I hadn't thought about it. I had always thought, well, I just put my head down and work hard, and it's getting recognized. But what I realized is it was getting recognized so long as I assimilated to the behaviors that were thought to be good leadership behaviors. So when I had my aha moments, I leaned in and started talking to young women and started, inside and outside of the company, trying to figure out, like, what have I missed all of these years? And I became compelled to do something to leave the industry better than I found it, since I was oblivious to the problem for 20 years. And as I started, on this campaign for change, the resistance was, as you can imagine, somewhat significant, not only from my male peers, but from my female peers that felt really uncomfortable with what I was, suggesting that women should do. Like, women should talk about their experiences. Women should call out the bad behavior. Women should not, be apologetic about asking why they weren't selected for a job that they believe they're fully qualified for. But women felt, like I did when I, first started speaking out about it, uncomfortable that people would think I was trying to advocate for myself, for my own benefit. But I around the same time had my first grandchild, and she was a girl, and, had some things happening in my life that, kind of were turning point moments for me. And I just decided I'm going to make a difference. And if it impacts my ability to get to the next level because people are uncomfortable with it, that's okay, because I'm already successful. And so I really did go on a crusade, talking to every group I could talk to, putting issues on the table in executive discussions, making people feel a little bit uncomfortable that we needed to put more focus on diversity and inclusion. And then at some point, probably in a moment of frustration, I thought, we're not making progress fast enough. How could we make progress faster? And I started experimenting with my own team, which at the time was fairly large and global, getting men together in a conversation. And what I very quickly learned is, despite the fact that you could look around any room and see that there were very few women, men hadn't spent any time thinking about the fact that we had a problem, just like I hadn't spent any time thinking about the fact that we had a problem. And so I thought, if awareness was the first step, then, you know, what could we do as the next step to make progress? And I thought helping men that really aren't aware become aware, and then giving them some practical advice on how they can engage in making it more inclusive would be the right next natural step. And that's kind of how the idea of the book was born. I wrote it with a co-author who had similar experiences to mine, because a lot of women have the similar experiences, but also different in the sense that she's younger and was in a completely different career path. But together we shared our stories, and we put advice out there, and started, really leaning into conversations with men and women about how we can make a difference. Now, I personally think we have a long way to go, but I have stopped counting the number of men that I have seen the transformation happen. Men that, were oblivious to the fact that they could even be part of the solution, let alone that they needed to be, that have become, equally passionate about making the change. And so, our hope is, if we can help to accelerate this change with the book in any small way, that we've been successful. And I would say that my career change 2.5 years ago was in part, wanting to join a company that was doing exciting things, but also it needed to be a company that really understood diversity and inclusion. And so if you know anything about Cummins has a long history of focus on diversity and inclusion. One of the first CEOs of the company, who was a CEO for 40 years, helped to organize the marches on Washington with Martin Luther King, is quoted, 40 years ago talking about diversity in the way that you would hear it talked about today. So in many ways, it's part of the DNA, and the company is better than many industrials, but still recognizes we have a long way to go. So I get to bring my passion for this particular topic, as well as my supply chain capability, to bear in the company, which is really exciting.
No, thanks for the authentic sharing. And yeah, interesting. I mean, if I can add my 2 cents, I had a similar aha moment. Like I never thought, okay, I'm a guy. I didn't realize that also from a woman perspective, it can happen that, like you shared, that you didn't also realize that, it's kind of lonely at some point, and then it dawned on you. I'll bring this question because it's in somewhat related, in some other ways it isn't, but it's a very relevant question from my end. How did you overcome the fact that they were experts in the companies you were leading, and probably made you feel that they know better the business, or in the business itself? And this kind of,
I've had so many experiences of going into lead organizations where I'm clearly not the expert, that I've gotten pretty comfortable with it. And so, I acknowledge it. That there are, in almost every leadership role that I've moved into, people in the organization that know the work better than I do. And what I bring to the organization is not necessarily the technical capability, it's the leadership. And so I acknowledge that up front. And I really do seek to find people within the organization that do have the technical depth, that do have the, innovative capability. Like different people bring different strengths to a team, and really try to leverage that. Because I think my role as a leader is certainly to understand enough about the organization to set the strategy and the vision for where we want to go, and then make sure that we have the right organizational culture, and we have the right skill sets and the right people on the bus, if I can say it that way, Jim Collins terminology, to actually get us there. And so I think that's what's helped me to navigate. Now, for sure, there have been, times when there's probably been back chatter about, why did she get the job? She doesn't, and when I went into the transmission role, I will tell you, I had imposter syndrome for, at least 3 months, if not longer, where I thought, they're going to figure out that if they scratch too deep below the surface, I do not know what I'm talking about relative to gear ratio and all things transmission. But what I did when I found out I was going into that role, leveraging my learning agility, I called my father and told him, number one, I was moving out of the country. And number two, that I was coming to visit him that next weekend, and I needed him to teach me everything that I needed to know about transmissions. And so when I went to visit him that weekend, he was very excited. He had all of his service manuals laid out, and my mom said he'd spent lots of time anticipating, teaching me everything that I needed to know about a transmission. I, of course, remembered 5% of what he taught me, but it gave me confidence that I knew the terminology. I could ask him questions. I could ask my team questions. And that helped me to have the confidence to move forward. But there were for sure times, and there have been times in every job, including this, this move to Cummins. Like, I come into a company that, most people at my level have been here for 20, 30 years, and I'm joining new. And I don't know anything about our policies. I don't know anything about our processes. I probably know less about engines than I know about all other parts of a mining machine or a construction equipment product. And I hadn't spent any time in the on-highway business, because Caterpillar was, at the time, not in the on-highway business. And so, there were even times in my current role that I thought, they're going to figure out that I don't know what I'm doing. But it's never happened. Like, it's never, nobody's ever said, like, wow, you're failing at this role because you aren't the technical expert. Because the higher up you get in a leadership role, the less your technical expertise matters, and the more your emotional intelligence and your leadership capability matters. Which is not to say that you don't need some technical foundation, right? I am continually learning about new technologies, and trying to understand how it can help me to ask the right questions and lead my team. But my advice to anyone that feels like you shouldn't take a chance on a role if you don't feel like you know the most about it in the organization is, stop thinking that way. My philosophy is, if I'm the smartest person in the room, I need to find another room where I'm not the smartest person in the room, because that's how we learn and grow.
Yeah, well said. On just a couple more questions, coming back a little bit on some examples, right, of where you've seen this kind of pipeline grooming done right, and specifically on the topic of diversity, whether it's grooming more female leaders, and obviously diversity is broader than that. You have race, you have a couple of other things, age groups, and so on. Can you give us some examples of where you've seen it from your experience, or from what you've witnessed, and maybe also doing research for the book, where it was done right, and specifically on the point of engaging men? Because another topic which sometimes is quite controversial in some ways, but so there's a lot of men that says, oh yeah, these women, they always talk to themselves, and they have the feminist group and whatever, right? I mean, they just it's almost I have heard that comment. I haven't made it myself. I have heard it. So I think your point of engaging men is such a crucial part of this making it work, right? So I was curious if you've seen it done right, and if yes, what would be some examples and maybe some principles?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thanks for asking it. The first thing that I would say is, rather than jumping right to grooming, women for leadership roles, I think we have to acknowledge that there are capable women already in the workplace, right? So I have been throughout my career, and many times I've been the first female, leader at an executive level in Europe, first female leader for this, that, and the other thing. It isn't that I was the first capable woman, right? There were capable women before me that didn't get recognized. And so I think it starts with the recognition that capable women exist, right? Women are graduating with undergraduate and graduate degrees at a much higher rate than men currently. In the US, it's like 1.4, significantly more women graduating with degrees than men. 50% of the population is female. Roughly 50% of the workforce is female in many countries around the world, including the US. And so the capability exists. So we first have to recognize that we've been overlooking it. And unconscious bias is largely the reason why we've been overlooking it, because we tend to look for people who are like us or who have had a similar career path. And so where I've seen it work well is when we actually start challenging what the requirements are for the jobs. I've had these conversations very recently about two particular roles within the Cummins organization, sales and service. So the aftermarket distribution channel, which is even more predominantly white male than the factory side of the business. And the way that we recruit sales managers, as an example, if you look at the requirements, you aren't going to get women that are going to have the requirements because you want them to have industry experience, some number of years. You want them to, have all of these things that only people that have come up in the organization and in that particular function in that industry would have. And women have not been there. And so we've been able to kind of flip the script a little bit to say, what are the competencies that we actually need? Like, what is it that we're trying to accomplish? And it turns out we actually want, relationship builders. We want people that have good customer insight capability. And so we have one example that I'm aware of where we changed, the requirements of the job and put a person in the role from a different industry, but with sales management experience. And she's running circles around her peers, right? And so it was just about reframing what is actually required and not being lazy and thinking, success is what success was in the past, right? It's just, you got to tick all the boxes that I ticked when I was in that job in order to be capable. So I think that's a piece of it. I think the other piece of it is looking at your network. How many people do you actually interact with professionally that are different than you? If you're older, how many young people do you talk to and learn from? If you're younger, how many, seasoned professionals do you talk to? If you're white, how many, people of color are in your network? If you're male, how many women are you mentoring or networking with versus men? As you get to know more people and broaden your network, you're naturally going to think about people. We're humans, right? So we want to make the best decision. We want to put the right people in the job, and we want to make sure they're successful. So I think the only way that you're going to get comfortable is being familiar with people who are different than you. So build your network professionally and personally, and then don't be afraid of making the wrong decision about putting someone in a role, because people often say, well, if I put a woman in a role that has traditionally been, male dominated, what if she fails? And my response is, men fail in that job all the time. It just isn't obvious because we have a lot of men, right? So we are going to sometimes make a wrong selection decision. Don't make it about, I have to take a chance on this person because they're different than the typical person in that role. Just know that sometimes you're going to get it right and sometimes you're going to get it wrong. And then the final thing I would say is, before just posting a job internally or externally, look at your team. Look at the makeup of the team. What is the team missing? And if you can identify what the team needs to be more diverse, then you can actually go, look for a slate of candidates that's going to help bring to the team what's missing. And that, by the way, is not reverse discrimination. That is actually building a team that's diverse so that you get better business results, which is the final point I'd end on here. Like, being inclusive is the right thing to do, but for me as a business person, it's actually the smart thing to do. There's loads of research, and my own experience confirms it. The more diverse and inclusive a team is, the better decisions you're going to make, the more creativity that you're going to get, the more innovation, the faster problem solving, and ultimately the better returns for the business. And you can Google 3,000 different research studies that confirm that. Don't just take my word for it. But so my question is, every leader is looking to be more successful and make their business more successful. So why wouldn't you do this?
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, absolutely. And we had a recent summit, and there was Meta. There was one of the speakers. She brought up specifically the numbers, and I can't remember top of my head, but there were a couple of percentage points in terms of Ebitda difference. There was a study that actually calculated it, and I think from a logical perspective, I think nobody would disagree with it. Just from a unconscious bias or our own lack of awareness, that's where the work has to be done. So such discussions, such books, such people like yourself, credit and kudos, because I think you're making a difference, Bonnie. So
I think sorry, Reddy. One thing I would just add to that, it is about intentionality, right? It won't happen automatically. So it is something that we have to decide we're going to focus on it. And focus on it, because unconscious bias all day long is going to take us down the path that we're comfortable with. So it really is about being intentional.
Mm. So on that note, and we had a couple more questions. I'll take you offline, but I'm just cognizant of time. I want to thank you very much for joining us, Bonnie. Keep inspiring and keep sharing with people, and much appreciate you taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you so much.